Today we're going to tell you about the sunniest city in the U.S.
Yep, we were just there a few weeks ago.
Hi, I hope the sun is shining where you are. Today we are going to tell you about a very sunny place.
Yep.
So, a couple weeks ago we went down to Arizona and we spent some time in Phoenix, and that is the sunniest place in the United States.
Yeah.
So we're going to show you some pictures from there. This was our first night there, and we were spending some time with some friends and doing some video for them. And we went to the church where they work, and this was the sunset that night. It was absolutely beautiful.
Yep.
And I don't know what I was going to say there, but we'll just go on to the next picture. So that because it is so hot and sunny there, and they don't get as much rain as we do up here in the Midwest, this is kind of like the normal scenery that you see everywhere you go. Lots of dirt, lots of red dirt, lots of sand, and a few green things here and there. Now we did find out from some people that it is not always just no rain. It's not like it's 100% of the time drought. There is a time during the end of summer, I believe, like July and around there, where they just get lots and lots of rain. But then, not again for the rest of the year. For the most part, just always 80s, 90s, 100
Plus.
degrees. Yep. And so you see a lot of this down there. Now, when we left here in the Minnesota, it was about 40s, low or high 30s maybe. And when we got there, it was in the 80s. It was nice. It was a little hot, but it wasn't as hot as normally when it gets up over 100. They told us that when it gets really hot during the year, it's kind of like winter here where people just stay inside most of the time. There it gets so hot that people just stay inside for a while until it starts to cool off later in the year. So here's another view. Now in Phoenix, they are in a valley, so they are surrounded by some mountains, and they have a few smaller hills and scenic areas that you can hike within the city. And one of the missionaries we spent time with took us to this place, and this is called Hole in the Rock. It's
I wonder why.
like this big. You still don't know why?
No, I know.
Oh, okay.
It was funny.
Oh, so it's this large rock that you can climb up, and there is a hole in the top that you can look through. Actually, I'm going to show you in this next picture, there are two holes, and the smaller one up on top, you can't really get to unless you're a rock climber. But this larger one down below, you can just hike to, and you can look through, and it's pretty neat. It's nothing dangerous about it. It's not going to fall on you or anything. It's just right there, just a hole right in this big rock. So here's a picture of us, and you can see the view behind it, all these trees and water and walking areas if you like walking in the sun. And a lot of tourists come to this spot. That's why you see a guy's head right there, because, well, it's just hard to get a picture without other people in there. But here's another view. Kind of cool. Kind of like looking through a peephole and then seeing something behind it. So you can see just that park area right there, but then off in the distance, and you may not be able to see it in this picture, is the city of Phoenix.
And this park area is a zoo.
Oh yeah, we didn't go to see any of the animals, but...
No, but there was a zoo right there.
Yep.
Probably why that's all fancy looking for a parking lot.
So everywhere you go in the Phoenix area, and then even for a couple hours as you head north, you'll see these cactuses everywhere. The saguaro cactus, and they take hundreds of years to grow to this size, I believe. In fact, for one arm to be fully grown, it was at least 20 years, right?
Yeah, I think for it to get started and stuff.
Yeah.
Not necessarily like all the way done growing.
Yeah, not like this tall. This one here was...
A very old cactus.
Yes. So you can see these everywhere, and it's just amazing to think of how long they have been around and growing and standing there and not getting much water, but still strong and able to survive. So that was pretty cool. We got a picture with this one here up on the top of the mountain. This is on the mountain overlooking the whole valley. And it's really neat to be up there. You can see it's all Phoenix, but a lot of them are like suburbs, and you can see them all from this point right here. You can just look west and you can look east and just see city at city, city, city until you get to the mountains again. It's just full of people. And to get from one side to the other in the valley takes a couple hours. It's just so huge. That's it. So, next week we will tell you more about Arizona and about some of the things we saw and things we did.
Yeah. So we have a new missionary story today, and this story is a little bit different because it's not just like, here's a person, here's where they went. It's kind of the story of how God used a really tough circumstance in this girl's life, and then how he used that for his glory later on in her life. So I'm going to tell the story of Corrie ten Boom. And you might not think right away like that she's a missionary if you know anything about her, but I think that you'll see why I think she's considered a missionary by the end too.
All right, sounds good.
Yep, go get some snacks. Okay, so I'm going to tell this story a little bit differently. I've been telling them, just showing you the picture, but this one I'm going to go ahead and read the story that they've written out, because I think that there's a lot of little details that I don't want to miss by just telling you this story, and there's lots of things that they connect together. And this story is laid out a little bit different too. The artwork is a little different. It's kind of more of like a pencil sketched feel, and it doesn't always show all the things that I'm talking about in this story, but I think it'll be enough to just help you kind of picture some of it as you listen. So this first part of the story we're going to talk about is how Corrie learned not to fear and not to be afraid of things. And it becomes really important later on in her life. So you'll see these little lessons that she learns and how God is getting her ready for some really hard things that she had to go through. Look, Nolly, there's a scary animal in the corner of the window. I can see it. It's right there in the dark. 4-year-old Corrie was really scared. She was so sure there was a big animal trying to get in and hurt her. This wasn't the first time she'd been scared by things she imagined outside her window. Luckily for Corrie, her 6-year-old sister Nolly slept in the same bed. Can I please hold on to you, Nolly? Then I won't be afraid, said Corrie. But when Nolly wanted to turn over, she couldn't because Corrie was still holding on tight to her pajamas. And it was really hard for Nolly to sleep. The next night, Nolly told her sister, "It's not easy when you hold on to my pajamas. Why don't you hold on to your little doll instead?" And Nolly was right. That worked. The next morning when Corrie woke up, the house was already full of life. Betsy, Corrie's other sister, was helping her get dressed, and Mother was singing downstairs, and Willem, her older brother, was asking for some clean socks. Their 3 aunts who lived in the same house with them could be heard chatting with each other, and at breakfast, Mother poured the tea while Aunt Anna sliced the bread. Father had already looked up the psalm in the Bible he was going to read to them. Corrie couldn't understand why she had been so afraid. Soon her brothers and sisters went off to school, and Corrie began to help her aunt in the house. Aunt Anna had come to live with the ten Booms because Corrie's mother was often very sick, and she couldn't take care of the family like she wanted to. Aunt Anna peeled the potatoes, and Corrie put them in the water. She tried not to splash too much. Sometimes Aunt Anna asked her to fetch something from downstairs, and when she was baking something yummy, Corrie got to lick out the bowl. During this time, they spent a lot of time talking together. Her aunt would tell her stories about the good old days. When you were a little baby, you used to cry all the time, she said. I'd wrap you up in my apron and I'd carry you on my back, and that would help you quiet down right away. I was very small, wasn't I, Aunt Anna? Said Corrie. Yes, you were. I couldn't put you on my back now, though, because you're way too big. Tell me some stories about the good old days, Corey said. Her aunt wasn't the only one who could tell good stories. Her mother could tell stories too. What Corey loved best was hearing Bible stories. Mother told her about the shepherd who had 100 sheep and took good care of them. The sheep felt safe with their shepherd. They weren't afraid because they knew he was protecting them. But one day, one of the sheep wandered off. That sheep must have been so scared. But do you know what the shepherd did when he noticed that one sheep was missing? He went and found it, and he was so happy he found it. Jesus told us that he is like our good shepherd. He wants to take care of us, just like the shepherd took care of his sheep. And Jesus died and paid the penalty for your sin, and then rose again 3 days later. And because of that, God can forgive your sin. Corey loved that story most of all, and Mother told it again and again and again. When Corey was 5 years old, she decided to trust Jesus as her Savior. Now she knew that Jesus was her friend, and he'd always be with her, even in the dark. And then she wasn't afraid to go to bed at night, and she didn't have to hang on to her sister's pajamas or onto her doll, because she knew that Jesus could hear her and she could talk to him wherever she was. Quite close to Corey's house was a street called the Blacksmith Street. Lots of time there were people there who weren't thinking clearly and who were not making good choices, and they were usually arguing and fighting. Corey hated it when people were fighting. Every time she saw people fighting, she ran home crying. One time there was a big fight and the policemen would come and take all the men away to the police station. One day Corey saw them taking the men away. Those people probably have to go into a cold, dark cell, she thought. Maybe they're very sad and lonely there. Was there anything Corey could do to help those people? Only God could really change their lives, but Corey decided she was going to pray for them. So before going to sleep at night, she would talk to Jesus about what happened in her day, and she would finish her prayer with, "Would you please help save the people on Blacksmith Street?" Many years later, when Corey was all grown up, she went camping with some girls. One night when Corey was talking to them about Jesus, one of the girls said, "Do you know that I'm almost your neighbor? I live over on Blacksmith Street." "So do I," said another girl. "My mom used to live there," said another girl. As the group began talking, all of them found out they had at one point lived or been connected to Blacksmith Street. And it was these girls that Corey had been praying for so many years, and she didn't even know. That was kind of cool. Corey saw how God had answered her prayer, how he began to save girls from the Blacksmith Street. One day, Corey was walking home with her mother and Nolly. It's terrible, she thought. Just awful. When they got home, she ran upstairs to her room and she leaned against her cupboard. She felt sick. Tears welled up in her eyes. What had just happened? Earlier, she had gone with her sister and her mother to visit some people who didn't have very much money. They lived at the top of a very old house, and they only had one room for all of them to live in. In that room, they had to do everything, to sleep, to eat, to cook, to wash their laundry, but that wasn't what made Corey feel sad and sick. There was something worse. A little baby had been born in their house, and the baby had died. When Corey and her mother and sister came to the room, they saw the baby lying in the cradle. The girls touched the baby, and they realized it was dead, and it was cold, and she didn't understand. She was so surprised at what death meant, and she didn't understand. And then it began to make sense. At some point, everyone would die. Her parents, her brother, her sisters, her aunts. What if they all died and Corey was left all alone? "Corey, dinner's ready. Come downstairs," yelled her sister. Corey walked very slowly. She sat down with the others, but she didn't feel like eating any dinner. "Corey, why don't you just still eat a little bit? You haven't had anything." She slowly chewed on her sandwich, and she looked around at her family. What if? Corey's mother probably understood why Corey looked so pale, but Corey didn't say any words. When their supper was over, Corey's father reached for his Bible, and he began to read from Psalm 46. He read the first 2 verses. "God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth gives way, though the mountains be moved into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble at its swelling." And he began to talk. You know what? No matter what happens, God is always with us, and he cares for us, and he is our safety in the midst of all the scary things that happen. So Corey realized, you know what? God was with her. When she was in bed that night, her father came to tuck her in. Now that she was alone, she said, "Daddy, I'm really afraid that you will all die and I'll be left all by myself." Her dad spoke comfortably to her. "Corey," he said, "when you take the train somewhere, when do I give you the money for the ticket? Do I give it to you 2 weeks in advance?" "No," she said, "you give it to me right before I leave." Our Father in heaven does exactly the same thing for us. If Mother or I or your aunts have to die, only then will God give you the strength you need. But since it hasn't happened yet, you don't have to be afraid right now. So Corey felt better. Never, even when she grew up, did she ever forget what her father told her. Now, Corey was 6 years old. She was wearing a nice clean dress and clean black stockings and boots that were all tied up with buttons. That's how the girls dressed back in the day when Corey was little. But you can see on her face that she was angry. She had planted her feet on the floor and she was holding tightly onto that banister as tight as she could. "I don't want to go to school. I want to stay home." "But Corey, at school you can learn to read." "I can read already." "And you can learn math." "Daddy can teach me math." "Don't you want to play with all the other children?" "No, I don't. I just want to stay here and help out Anna and take care of my doll." "What is the matter?" asked Corey's dad when he heard Corey's angry voice. "Corey doesn't want to go to school." "But all 6-year-olds go to school. You need to go to learn." "Oh, is that it? You're afraid of going to school? Well, you know what? Let's go, the two of us, together." So her dad put on his coat and his hat, and he took Corey's hand, but Corey was holding on so tightly to the handrail, and he pulled each one of her 10 fingers loose and held her hand tightly, and they began to walk to school. Corey's face was all red and full of tears, and she was crying, "I don't want to go to school. I don't want to go." But her father was very determined. He brought her all the way to her classroom. He said goodbye and said, "Corey, at 12 o'clock, I'll be right here waiting for you." That's how it went on for 3 days. But on the 3rd day, Corey saw another father coming with a crying boy in his arms. "Oh, that's silly," she thought. "I don't want to be acting like that." And from then on, she stopped crying. Her dad didn't have to take her and drag her to school anymore. She just went to school with her sister. Corey realized that school wasn't quite that bad after all. Corey's cousin Dot was about the same age as Corey. They played together in the big church in the city of Harlem where Corey was growing up. Dot's father was the caretaker who took care of the church, and he didn't mind if the girls played there. One afternoon, as it was getting dark, Corey looked out to see the evening light shining through the windows. It reminded her that Jesus is the light of the world, and it made her feel very happy. "Corey, let's go home. I'm scared," Dot said. "Scared?" Corey said. "How could you be scared if Jesus was with us?" And Corey was beginning to learn a good lesson about how to trust Jesus and how not to be afraid. This was something she was going to have to remember for her whole life. So that's the first part of our story, and you're going to have to come back next time to see what other lessons she learns and what big things happen in her life that God gets her ready for through all these little stories and how he works it all together.
Sounds like a good start.
Yeah.
Okay. Today, we are going to tell you about some people that we spent time with while we were in Phoenix. And they are some friends from Faith Baptist Bible College, where I went to school. And they are Christopher and Johanna England. And they live in Mesa, Arizona, which is part of Phoenix. Now, if you remember 2 weeks ago, we told you about Trevor and Amelia Galbraith. And Trevor and Chris were actually roommates their first year at school together. And they were just across the hall from me, and I had them in my Devos group. And so this is Chris England and his wife Johanna and their son. So we asked them a few questions, and here's what they told us about where they live and what they do. As I mentioned, they live in Mesa, Arizona, located in the Sonoran Desert. And they said people usually want to know about 2 things, the weather and the city. As far as the weather, and we told you a little bit about this a moment ago, but he goes into better detail. This place lacks in water and shade. It makes up for the searing heat and blinding sunshine when they have that shade. but they don't get much of it, and they don't get much of the water. The hottest part of the year can reach over 120 degrees.
Whew.
He says this happens rarely, but it does happen.
That's
And
warm.
their coolest is about 30 degrees, which is also very rare, but it can happen. As far as the city, Mesa is the largest city they have ever lived in. Now, he is from Illinois. He did not live in Chicago. He was a farm kid, and so he's from a small town. And then Johanna also grew up in Iowa, and a fairly small city. Ankeny is one of the larger cities in Iowa, but compared to Phoenix and Mesa, not very big. So this is the biggest city they've ever lived in.
Yep.
The Mesa is part of Maricopa County, which has a higher population than the whole state of Iowa. So that gives you some perspective. Mesa was originally founded by Mormons, and there remains a strong Mormon presence throughout the city, from the mayor to the dozens of Mormon church buildings scattered everywhere that you see a white steeple. We asked them, what do you do to reach out and build relationships with people in the area and or through your ministry? So here's another picture of them with their son. I believe this is also at the Hole in the Rock on the left. Here's their church. And back to our question about what they do to build relationships with people. He says there are many things, but here are a few that we work on as a church. Part of living in such a large metropolitan area is that there are many opportunities to reach out to a lot of different people. One way that differs from the rural areas in which he grows up is the consistency of visitors. He says we have at least one visitor every Sunday.
Wow.
Following up and reaching out to these people is a valuable aspect of our outreach. We have a basketball court that is always open to community, and we make contacts by interacting with the individuals and families from the neighborhood that use it. They canvass nearby neighborhoods with flyers about information about once a year. And as a family, they are building relationships with their neighbors. And as they get to know them, they invite them to church and offer to be a neighborly help when they can. Here's another picture of them spending time with their church family. And because of where they live, I believe they also have a diverse group of people from different backgrounds. And so that makes for a really neat ministry as well. I asked, what is something unique about where you live? And they said, being so close to Mexico, the Mexican restaurants are not of any higher quality than anywhere else we have lived. It always surprises them when people realize that the Mexican food there is not necessarily better than anywhere else you might go in the U.S. Which is funny. I would have thought, oh, it must be better down there, but he says it's about the same. He says, we live in a desert, so most things that are alive can hurt you. From the variety of the cactus, and you don't really see them in this picture because this is more in the mountainous region where they have other plants and more rain. But we saw the picture of the cactus that we showed you earlier, and those can hurt you. We didn't touch it. To the well-known scorpions, you have to be cautious where you put your hands. Where they live in Arizona, it used to be mostly citrus groves, and many people have citrus trees. I did not know that about the area. In the fall, people bring their extra produce to share with church members: oranges, lemons, limes, and grapefruits.
Like here, we could bring zucchini and
Tomatoes.
cucumbers.
Yeah, maybe some potatoes sometimes. Here's another beautiful sunset, a picture that he sent us. This was not our picture. And look at that purple. So that is from their area. The Phoenix Valley is often called the Valley of the Sun. If you travel for 2 hours in any direction, you will leave the desert valley and find yourself in majestic mountains rolling plains, and densely forested areas.
Oh, that's pretty.
That is a gorgeous picture. He says, we have the best of every climate within driving distance. We asked, how has COVID impacted life and ministry in your area? He says it caused us to stop meeting in person for about 8 weeks, which sounds very similar to what happened here. We still follow pretty strict social distancing policies in order to meet safely, but we do meet for every service now. However, we have not been able to visit people in the hospital, which has created an interesting dynamic in caring for those believers. Almost every place of business around requires a mask and has suggestions for distancing. Here are a few more pictures of the area down there, and we'll show you some pictures like this too. But this is what he was talking about when you leave the valley and you start to get into the mountains. There's all sorts of different kinds of scenery. From the desert to the forest, the mountains, the rivers. Wow, look at that.
The sky is really pretty that way.
Yep.
Oh, and a big cactus in the front too.
And here's another picture from the hole in the rock in that zoo area with all those trees and the water there off in the distance. I asked him, is there anything else you wish that people would ask that they never do? And he says, we wish people would ask if they could serve with us. There are so many opportunities in the big city for people to come down, find a job, and join the ministry here at Calvary. We can use any believer who is following the Lord and eager to serve Him. If there are any ministry-minded folks who would like to get their feet wet in ministry, Calvary is the place for you. And it's true. You can live down there, you can get a job, there are lots of places to work down there, and if you just want to do a little more in ministry than you are anywhere else, their church provides those opportunities. So you can still work a regular job without actually being a missionary supported by other people and do more ministry type work where they are. Another picture of the scenery in the area. And here they are at the Grand Canyon, and we're going to tell you some about the Grand Canyon because it was an exciting time for us. Lastly, anything else interesting that people would like to hear about you? And here was his response. He talks about the saguaro, that big cactus that we took a picture of. There are multiple ways to spell it correctly, and it is pronounced the same either way. They can grow to be over 200 years old and up to 40 feet high. They bloom during the spring, a popular time for photographers to visit because there are not many things as beautiful as a blooming saguaro in the sunrise or sunset. And I believe one of the pictures we looked at earlier here has a blooming one. Maybe not. Maybe that one just looked like it was, but...
The flowers on them are really pretty.
Yeah, and we didn't get to see those. We've only seen pictures.
I have seen them in Peru, though. Somebody I lived with had one in their backyard.
Finally, Arizona is part of the Wild West. God has us living in the setting that many Western movies were made to reflect or were actually filmed. In many ways, it is still the Wild West. Arizona allows open carry of a firearm, so it is not uncommon to see someone wearing a cowboy hat, vest, jeans, and cowboy boots with a gun strapped to their hip.
That's funny.
That's pretty cool. I maybe didn't notice it, maybe because I don't find that here, I didn't look for it, but maybe we passed some people down there that were doing that. Well, thanks again for joining us. We are going to tell you more about Arizona in the next few weeks, and we're going to keep learning about Corrie ten Boom and seeing some other people around the world and what they are doing.
Yeah. Thanks for watching. Hope you found our hidden object.
Yep.
And tune in next week.
Bye.